Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Fremont for Everyone 25th Assembly District Candidate Forum featuring Alex Lee and Bob Brutton. Assembly District 25 stretches from Newark, where I am tonight, throughout Fremont, south of Maury Avenue, Milpitas, Santa Clara, and the Berryessa and East San Jose portions of San Jose. A little bit of background about Alex and Bob, but they'll be introducing themselves. Alex grew up in Milpitas in San Jose and is a graduate of UC Davis. Alex has interned with Congressman Honda and worked in the state capitol with Senator Herron, and then as a field representative for Assembly Member Lowe. Bob is a Fremont resident and was elected to 3 terms on the Ohlone College Board. Bob has been a longtime local business person, starting an electronic manufacturing engineering and sales representative company, among other business ventures. Fremont for Everyone, our organization, was formed around support for a housing navigation center and supporting the Fremont City Council in its site selection process. We were pleased when the council unanimously supported implementation of a housing navigation center in Fremont. Our vision statement is as follows. Fremont for Everyone advocates for inclusive, affordable housing for our residents and ensures Fremont is welcoming of our new neighbors while remaining a wonderful community for living closer to work, raising a family, and aging in place. A home for everybody. Please visit our wonderful website at Fremont for Everyone, and 4 is spelled out F-O-R, fremontforeveryone.com for upcoming events. And for tonight's debate, we have the top 2 finalists from the March 3rd primary. That was actually before our pandemic. It seems like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? This was a hotly contested race of 9 candidates, with Bob, the lone Republican, and 8 Democrats. Bob emerged in first place with around 21% of the vote. Alex came in second with slightly more than 15% of the vote. The format tonight is as follows. We're going to have opening and closing statements where each candidate will be given 2 minutes each. Then, after the opening statement, we're going to have moderated questions where we're going to be alternating as to who the first person is to answer the question, followed by the second person, with the first person answering in rebuttal. And so we'll be toggling back and forth between the candidates to give an opportunity of distinguishing themselves from each other. So during the presentation, after we're going to do the questions, we invite you to look at your Q&A box here on your Zoom screen and type questions away, because we're going to be reserving the last portion of the debate to your questions. Those will elicit 1-minute responses, and we do ask that you keep topic focused. This is not an opportunity to focus on one candidate versus another, but to focus on the issues that we're all interested in. And with that, I welcome you again, Bob and Alex. And so the first question will go to Bob Brutton for 2 minutes, and you can look at the timer there, followed by Alex. Why are you running, Bob, for Assembly?
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for putting this together. You know, and this primary election was in March, and, you know, and I did come in first place during the race, but boy, has this thing changed in the last few months, right? When we had last time, we had crowded roads, low unemployment, and a budget surplus. Now we have almost the exact opposite. The roads are less crowded, high unemployment. We have big deficits, and their state government is really badly broken. And this pandemic has shown light on the disparities in our economy, our values, our opportunities. And this election is now even more important that it provides us with the opportunity to make really bold, substantive changes that can and will improve our lives. Now, during the first campaign, my focus was, and still is, a very positive, issue-oriented, solution-based campaign. And the campaign slogan is, just solutions, not excuses. Because that is where I plan to stay focused, both looking for solutions and following through for successful outcomes. Now, I'm going to Sacramento for 2 reasons. 1, I want to repair our broken state government. And 2, prepare our state government for the future. The four top areas that I was focusing on, and I still am, are improving education, improving mass transit, improving civil justice, and improving the way the government treats us. So I look forward to really discussing all the issues, and thank you again for having this event.
Thank you, Bob. Alex, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Lee. I'm running to represent Assembly District 25, the district where I grew up. Now, I ran to represent my hometown because prior to COVID-19, California was the 5th wealthiest economy in the world. And in the 5th wealthiest economy in the world, 1 in 5 Californians lived in poverty. And in my home county here in Santa Clara County, 1 in 5 residents paid more than 50% of their income just towards housing. Now that picture has drastically changed because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the recession we're living through. Now more than ever, we are going to face an avalanche of evictions and foreclosures because right now the federal government, the Republican federal government, has failed to act. Our state needs the federal aid so that we can stay afloat and make sure that working class families aren't left out in the cold. Now, what I'm hoping to do is bring my progressive vision for the state and that advocacy to make sure that our social safety net is there for all Californians. This recession and this pandemic is here to stay. It's not going to go away in the next couple months as we had hoped, because today we surged the record in daily cases and surpassed New York in cases as well. So we have to have leaders who are willing to adapt to the new future that we have, people that will advocate for bold solutions to a system that's clearly and fundamentally broken. And I'm glad that Representative Ro Khanna for our congressional district, Assemblymember Kansen Chu, and Senator Bob Wachowski have succeeded me in going to Sacramento and fighting for our communities. Because what we need is strong democratic values that are for including everyone, making sure that we have an affordable future, transit for everyone, and to fight the biggest crises we have, including the pandemic, as well as the climate crisis that we are facing. So I hope today to share more of my vision about my urbanist vision with everyone and how we can tackle these problems, and look forward to doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Our first question is going to go right back to you, Alex. The topic is homelessness. What legislation is needed in Sacramento to prevent homelessness from occurring in the first place? And what must the state do to transition unhoused people back into stable housing? Alex, you have 2 minutes, followed by Bob, and then you'll get a 1-minute rebuttal. Go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. So absolutely, homelessness prior to the pandemic-induced recession was a top priority for my campaign, as well as a top issue facing the entire Bay Area. In Santa Clara County alone, my home county, we have 10,000 unhoused folks. During the pandemic, I was lucky enough, or was honored enough, to work with unhoused advocates, formerly and currently unhoused persons, to get COVID relief and COVID hygiene kits to people out in encampments. And with that experience, it was very humbling. Out in the summer heat, I was able to talk to folks on how they're weathering the pandemic, how a lot of the social safety net, the services that they relied upon, were closing because of the pandemic. And what the state needs to do, especially now, to prevent a new wave of people who will become homeless, is 2 things. One is we need to be providing for affordable housing construction to make sure that our unhoused neighbors are placed in housing, supportive housing, to make sure that, you know, whatever it is that they're going through, whether it be economic, health, mental health problems, that they have them addressed so they can get back on their feet. And another really important thing, of course, is mortgage and rent relief. Right now, California, luckily, is putting a pause on evictions. But if we can't work, and if you can't pay your rent come 6 months from now, a year from now, we will face a tsunami of evictions. And that is why I will hopefully be championing legislation to make sure that we have a robust mortgage and rent relief program to make sure that people don't end up on the streets and worsen our public housing crisis.
Thank you, Alex. Bob.
This has been a persistent problem that really has defied any type of solutions. There have been so many people trying to fix this from the government side, the private sector side. And the legislature is really not the key focus point. It is a facilitator to help solve these problems, and that's what I plan to do. These, like what you're doing here in Fremont with the senator or Governor Newsom and his hotel programs, we have to see how well these continue to work. Now, the things I will be promoting in Sacramento is one in job creation. We take a look at a company like Pride Industries or Devereaux, which provided jobs for handicapped jobs for ex-cons, jobs for people who are in need. And the states would contract with them to buy their products, knowing that they would be slightly more expensive, but giving people the pride of work, giving them a pride of job, because we just can't let them just be in homelessness forever. We have to find ways. Secondly, we must dramatically improve our education system for them. It is part of the whole training programs, and I'll be providing more of that details more about how the community colleges can be a big part of the answer. Also, once this pandemic moves a little bit more, we can certainly deal with people like Habitat for Humanity, the Catholic Charities, a variety of different sources that can help solve some of these problems without any more government money. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex, you have a minute rebuttal, and I should say this to both candidates. You don't have to use the rebuttal,
Okay.
but please go ahead if you wish.
Well, I will this time. I'll just say very quickly, and I forgot to mention that I was a big supporter of the Navigation Center, even when it wasn't popular in Fremont, and I would get yelled at by Fremont neighbors. So that was very fun. But here's the thing. We do need to invest in this problem, because whether you like it or not, right now, every taxpayer is using your money towards homelessness, whether it can be a constructive effort or it can be a destructive effort. Right now, your tax dollars are going towards police who shoo homeless individuals from encampment to encampment, and that doesn't solve the problem. What we need is a real robust investment in affordable housing and supportive housing to that degree. We can't just rely on a jobs first approach. That doesn't work, especially during a pandemic, which could last forever and ever. When people can't go to work and they can't pay their rent or they can't have any housing, it's not going to work. It's a system that is currently built to fail. And what we really need is to solve homelessness. And it's not that theoretically hard. To solve homelessness, you get people homes. That's what we need to do.
Thank you, Alex. And the next question, Bob, you're up first.
Oh, okay.
And this is about the housing crisis in general. Identify the primary hurdles to providing abundant, affordable housing and your vision and how the state can meet this growing crisis.
Again, what was the first part of the question?
Identify the primary hurdles to providing
okay.
abundant, affordable housing and how your vision in the state can meet this growing need.
Okay, well, there are a lot of hurdles, and some of them don't seem as intuitive as you may think. And ideas I have. One, I'm going to be promoting sales tax reform. And you may, what the heck is that all about? Well, the point here is this, that houses cost cities money. And so often they don't want housing. I am proposing that we take 2 cents of the current sales tax and send it to the zip code of where you shop, or where you live, as opposed to where you shop. This will give her a reward for cities to want to build housing. Secondly, campaign finance reform will actually is often you may not think this is the case, but often if you look at local elections, it's somebody for a developer or against a developer, and they smash each other. And that's the reason why we have some of these mismatch of problems. So, and if you look at what before the COVID, we had the basic housing problems. We had created 750,000 jobs, and we had only developed 200,000 housing units. Well, no wonder we had so many problems. So since the pandemic, rents are beginning to come down a little bit. There's certainly a lot of product in the marketplace, but I believe some of the ideas I have, for instance, also in addition to the sales tax reform and campaign finance reforms, it's also to work on utility costs. Because not only is it so much is expensive to rent, it's also expensive to run them. And so we need to look at ways how to reduce the gas, water, and the other types of prices, because we know those are also going up. So thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
Thank you. So the fundamentals to solving the housing crisis are in the 3 Ps. It's production, preservation, and protecting. We need to produce more affordable housing. We need to preserve the housing stock we have, and we need to protect renters. Also, my video is doing kind of weird things for some reason. With that said, during the pandemic, it is even more important now. In Sacramento, I'm hoping to champion repealing Article 34 in the California Constitution, a huge impediment to building social housing. The problem which we have today is that cities, counties, and the state, to this degree, depend on private industry to build housing at a profit. Now, land is expensive, materials are expensive, and there's a real investment opportunity in land and homes. So we are seeing housing become a commodity, not a human right or a place to actually have a roof over your head. So we need to reverse that equation. And I believe that through social housing, through through housing built not for profit, but to house people is the key to do so. That's why I'm proud to not take any money from developers at all. I think I agree that campaign finance reform is much needed, but I think it's the bravery of candidates to stand up and say, we won't accept that, and it won't influence our agenda or vision at all. So we need to be producing a lot more housing, and I think through social housing, public housing is the way to do it. We can get people housed at affordable rates and no longer rely on the predatory nature of the private market to do so.
Bob, do you
I still believe in the private market and assistance. For instance, you take a look at what Apple's just introduced with Juno Residential, which is talking about how to produce apartments at a much lower cost, or Star City, which is talking about co-living arrangements, and certainly organizations like Habitat for Humanity. There are ways in which we can, and I was proud to be involved with my father in Phoenix, where we had the largest Habitat for Humanity project. It's a great way to get people involved as part of ownership, the pride of ownership, without the government spending a lot of money.
Thank you. Let's go back to the 2-minute clock now for the next question. The rebuttals are only 1 minute, but Bob, you kept within it, so I really appreciate it. I'm going to drill down a little bit on an area because I think this is important for everyone to understand. There's a concept called exclusionary zoning. What is it? Do you think it's an issue in the supply of needed affordable housing? And if so, what steps could and should the state take when the cities demand to keep local control over new development? So I believe this is Alex, you're up first, please.
Yeah, so I do not believe in exclusionary zoning when it comes to residential use. What we have right now, and
I don't mean to interrupt you, Alex, but can you define what exclusionary zoning is?
Yes.
Yeah, and then go ahead.
Yes, exclusionary zoning is where you say this tract of land can only have one use and one use only, and this is what kind of structures can be built on it. I think the simplest terms to say. So for example, San Jose, which is the largest city in Assembly District 25, is 94% single family homes. It is systematically proven to be some of the most wasteful and inefficient way of developing land. And still today, we have that type of development, right? It's the quintessential 1950s, 1960s style living that is no longer sustainable in the era where we realize human-caused climate change is very real and disastrous. So try to remember all the other parts of the question, but I am not supportive of it. What I think we need to do is more inclusionary zoning. So that's when we build larger house. So say a giant apartment complex comes up, it's 50 units, and I would like that 25% of the units are affordable by law. So we need to make sure including those uses and including those income strata into it. I think I'm forgetting certain parts of the question, but we generally need to be smarter about our land use and be more inclusive of different uses and different income strata.
Well, let me help you out, Alex.
Yes.
What things should the state do in the face of cities saying we want local control so we can say no to all development? So you hear that a lot locally. So what do you do?
Yeah, well, I think one bill that I want to champion that Kansan Chu has thought of as well is that to up our inclusionary zoning requirement. So that's to say every time something is built, barring some requirements, it would be a certain percentage affordable. So I would like to see something that's like 25% affordable for buildings or structures that have more than say 50 units or 20 units in it. And I think that is an even compromise to make, right? We have to, and this is how I would talk to cities. It is such a pain in the butt right now to negotiate with developers to say, build the affordable housing on site. Rather,
Thank
they would
you,
pay.
Alex.
Okay.
You'll get another minute, I think. Bob, it's your turn.
Okay. You can either hit somebody over the head or you can give them an enticement to do some good things. And I'm more the type that let's give them some enticements to do the right thing. I talked earlier about the sales tax reform, and that can and will work. It will provide rewards for the cities, because basically when you look at this problem we had with traffic prior to the COVID, is that people like Palo Alto had 3.2 jobs for every house, and San Jose had 0.7 jobs for every house. So you had this massive traffic problem, and some people, can we build houses closer to where we work to make some sense? Now, under the Brunton proposal of putting some sales tax to where you live instead of where you shop, it provides some of the calculus that they want to push back against some of the NIMBYism that happens in communities, that push back against some of the, the costs they'll want to put higher density housing, because that'll mean more money to them and actually give them the money for the infrastructure they're going to need for that housing.
Bob, I don't mean to interrupt, but I gave Alex an opportunity to describe what is exclusionary zoning. Do you think it's an issue? So we understand the sales tax, but why don't you focus on that aspect of it? You have a position on it.
I don't know enough about exclusionary zoning to tell you what I want to do about the state's role in it.
Okay. And you have 50 seconds to use up your time.
I'll give it up for something else. There's somebody else.
Alex, do you want to respond?
Yes. Well, I was just saying generally, cities have hard time enough to convince developers to build on-site affordable housing. They would rather pay in lieu fees or development fees, which are the incentives that Mr. Brunton are talking about. They have skirted their responsibility because it is cheaper and it is easier to pay the fees. It's a cost of doing business. And also, I want to address the whole sales tax reform idea. This sales tax reform idea, while I think well-intentioned, and I understand where you're coming from, would only benefit the wealthy. It would disproportionately affect zip codes in our district, which are much more working class. So people that have less means to pay when they're just buying things that aren't sales tax or sales tax exempted, like their groceries, are going to miss out on those tax dollars. And it is fundamentally unfair and is in fact regressive and would only benefit the wealthy. And that's why I'm vehemently opposed to such a sales tax idea. It is completely misplaced, and we should be thinking about how to, in fact, get more revenue from the people who need it in a progressive way, not a regressive way. Thank you.
Bob, you're up first. 2 minutes. This is on infrastructure and transportation.
Okay.
Tell us how you're going to reduce traffic and decrease reliance on cars and more reliance on alternative transit.
Okay. Well, I have to put some foundation to this issue because it's a critical part of what my plan is. We have 24 mass transit agencies in the Bay Area, and they don't work well together. And even prior to the COVID, ridership was down or heading downward. And so the main focus is to try to get these transit agencies to work better together. We in Alameda County actually get a chance to vote. Of those 24 agencies, only 2 have elected boards, and that's AC Transit and BART. So some of the things that I'm going to be working on is trying to provide incentives and trying to get first to work on our mass transit agencies to work better together, consolidate, and make them accountable to the people through an elected process. This is something that has been recommended a lot because we're looking at the riderships are way down on Caltrain. They talk about how should expect VTA to down into Santa Clara for the BART. There are so many questions that need to be talked in at a regional level and have an accountability level. So my main approach is going to be first is on mass transit reforms of getting the agencies to work better together. And then just secondly, I think we're going to have to learn how to start transitioning from a gas tax to a mileage tax. At some point, as we get the curve of more and more battery-operated cars, people need to pay their fair share of how to take care of that road. And the road doesn't care whether it's a battery-operated car or a gas-operated car. And so that will help to bring it a little bit more fair. And also we can then monitor it a little bit by weight and height, or weight and length, because we know a larger vehicle works on the road. And that kind of money can help pay for some of the infrastructure that's going to be needed to keep that road together. And finally, I still support the Dumbarton Bridge right-of-way project connecting the Caltrain and BART over the Dumbarton Bridge area.
Very good. Alex, 2 minutes.
Yeah. So I agree. We need a real consolidation of all the transit agencies in the Bay Area. That's why I've committed to work with Seamless Bay Area and work with Assemblymember David Chu next year to bring back the bill, which would transform all of our agencies into one. However, that does not solve the fundamental problem transit is facing. Right now, as we speak, Caltran could die. They could literally die right now, because if we do not pass an emergency sales tax measure across the 9 counties, which is not ideal, we would lose service of Caltran, and it could cause a real system collapse of transit across the Bay Area. And that highlights the fundamental problem. Our transit right now only depends on 2 main revenue sources, which are sales tax and fare box. It is highly unstable. And if we are to accomplish a truly car less dependent culture and expand our transit agencies, yes, we must consolidate and have efficiency there, but we must also be able to expand and fully fund our services. As the COVID pandemic is illustrating right now, when you don't have riders, it will fail. But when the few people, especially the essential workers who rely on public transit to go work at our grocery stores or our pharmacies, they need those services. What happens if it fails, if the system collapses? That's why in addition to consolidating it all, we need to have a hard conversation with the voters about how to properly fund our transit. Whether will it be through property taxes, will it be through extended sales tax measures, but whatever we need a stable source of income to fund the transit agencies we deserve. So we need a whole Bay Area kind of consolidation to make sure that people are no longer trapped with just their cars. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob, you've got 1 minute to add any thoughts you might have on this question.
Again, to reiterate a few things, that these should become an elected positions, this, as opposed to the way they're doing it ad hoc. So there's actually some people that are accountable to the taxpayers, as well as they're focused in on making sure that there is this seamlessness, because people will ride on mass transit if it's convenient. And we can do this California style by working sure that marrying all the different types of both the last mile to the long distance. So I'm all in favor of making our seamless Bay Area and getting our mass transit agencies work better together for you.
Very good. This is our next question. And Alex, you're going to be up first. Our first overtly COVID-19 question, which has been hanging over all the discussions so far this evening. What can and should the state do to provide relief to our unemployed residents affected by COVID-19? And what should the state do to promote swift and safe economic recovery for all Californians?
Absolutely. Well, I think every elected official and every person in California needs to be doing their part to advocate for the federal government to provide monthly stimulus payments to every resident in the United States right now, especially California, where we are now becoming the second time hotbed of coronavirus. Because the problem is this: if people do not have the means to survive, do not have food, do not have rent, do not have payment for their mortgage, they will be forced back into the economy. And that is what the Republican Party, the party that Mr. Brunton belongs to, is advocating for. They would rather people die in sacrifice to our economy than have real lasting, a way to basically freeze the economy and free society until pandemic is over, right? That is what other developed countries in the world are able to do right now, how to navigate that. Because what we need to do is basically put our economy on ice until the public health situation improves. But what you're seeing today is that people driven to desperation, needing to work, needing to provide for their families, are desperate enough to go out to work where perhaps they don't have hazard pay, they don't have sick leave, but they're putting their lives out there literally on the line to help everyone else, to keep the economy afloat. And that is not fair. And that is why we're seeing today with this vast confusion where counties are left to reopen as they will perhaps, and now we're seeing surges in COVID infections. So what the state should be doing with all its power as much as possible is keep that safety net in place. Unfortunately, California doesn't have the money printer the Fed does, but we need to be doing everything we can. So a very important thing that I would champion if I were in office now, especially, is the mortgage and rent relief. Because if that uncertainty hangs over everyone's head every first of the month, that is terrifying. And the bills will keep piling and piling and piling and piling up. And perhaps maybe a year from now, maybe December 2021, we finally have the vaccination, pandemic is finally over, but we have a tsunami of evictions, and we should not be doing that. So that's why the state needs to take a strong and active role in protecting the public health and making sure there's clarity in what we're supposed to do.
Thank you, Alex. Bob, 2 minutes. You put your shield on, I see that, okay.
So certainly as government leaders, we need to be setting an example too, to try to end this COVID as soon as possible. I wear my shield wherever I go, and I find it uncomfortable, just as many of you do as well at home. But it is part of what we have to do to try to get this done with sooner. And I don't have a great answer as to how to fund all this pandemic disaster. I think that there are things we can do from Covered California to help in the moderating some of the medical costs, which is part of the living. We can do some of the utility relief issues to try to get some of that part of the cost down. But we are going to have to find a balance of the economy and people working. I disagree that Republicans want to kill people. issues here are, and I had made the decision early on that to follow the leadership as to and learn from what they're going to be doing, because when we get there in December, hopefully we've learned from them. I think that I do not favor expending the additional $600 at the end of July in the federal government. If the state wants to do some things, they can do that. But we're in the middle of July. We don't know what the federal government is going to give us. They're still talking, and the state. So I don't have any. I wish I could tell you that there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but there isn't. So we're going to have to work our way through this.
Alex, 1 minute.
Well, with all due respect, Bob, I mean, you sound very much like the leader of your party, Mr. President Donald Trump, in which they whiffle and waffle about what to do. They think that this situation will resolve itself on its own, but the federal government and all state governments are in a unique position to do the best for its people right now, to actually help us weather the situation. It is no wonder today that across the nation we have so many cases, because without federal leadership, Republican federal leadership of the CDC, of the president, and FEMA, the things that all our states rely on, people like Dr. Cody, the public health officer of Santa Clara County, and all these local municipalities have to improvise our global pandemic response as we go. So this is not the time to say, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. We have been in the pandemic for 4 months right now. I am absolutely pissed. I know many parents out there are pissed that they don't know what's going to happen with their schools and their kids in school. They don't know what's going to happen with their job. They don't know what's going to happen without their rent. We have the tools to provide answers to people. We just need the courage to step up and do them.
Thank you, Alex. The next topic is public safety and policing, and Bob will be up first. What measures can the state take to increase accountability within law enforcement to regain the public trust? And do you believe in defunding the police? And if so, what would that look like at the state level and redirecting funding from our state prisons and law enforcement to perhaps social services and affordable housing? So Bob, you're up first.
Our police are in a very tough position. This job keeps getting more complicated for them. They're being tasked to do so many roles that they were not necessarily originally planned to do. So I do not favor defunding them. As far as restructuring and helping in their training, it's conceivable that now the training of new police officers might be longer to cover a variety of different techniques that they're being asked to do in social services. The state could also help a little bit there and maybe opening up some of the mental health facilities so that part of the issues of where some of the potential problems, they could go to a place to get some treatment. And from that, then we can hopefully, I must admit through my lens, I've never had a bad police experience. So I feel for those people who've had, and I've tried my best to understand that. I know that my top priority, and I know we're going to get to that soon, about how to deal with this issue through education reforms. But as far as defunding the police, I'm not in favor of that.
Alex.
Well, unequivocally, Black Lives Matter. They should. But our public institutions often don't seem to reflect that. When I watch the video out of Georgia of a man on a jogging, Ahmaud Arbery, and then he was gunned down, and then a month later, you watched the visceral video of George Floyd being suffocated to death for 8 minutes by police officers, there's two thoughts that go through my head. One is, how many times have I seen the exact same thing, a cycle of rinse and repeat, where police murder a civilian in broad daylight and they get away with it? That's enough to stir action in any person, I think, that knows the repeated history, not just the recent history of what we've seen, but history going back to the 1960s, the civil rights era, where obviously an icon, John Lewis, just passed away, and he was beaten to an inch of his life by police. And you go back further and further and further, and we have the same pattern. Fundamentally, modern policing is broken. Yes, they are tasked with too much. Every social problem, homelessness, addiction, mental health disorders, they are asked to come. But we can't solve every issue with handguns and handcuffs. So at the state level, and I do support reprioritizing our public tax dollars towards our social programs, because that is the only way to truly solve crime. It's not by locking people up. We've proven that in the 90s. It's not any way to solve crime. It only papers it over at best. So what I approve at the state, or what I hope to do at the state level, is to radically, or try to really push through the demilitarization of the police, to ban, and this bill did go through before with support of both houses, it was vetoed by the governor, to ban the purchasing and the possession of military style equipment, things we've seen across the nation: tanks, sonar weapons, grenade launchers, weapons of war on our streets. We need to ban those things, and we need to work on really making sure that we can dismantle the system of violence that we have relied upon.
Bob, 1 minute.
No, I'll pass.
You're going to pass. Okay. We're going to, I hope everyone's writing questions. We're going to have more audience participation tonight, which is terrific, than we did in our first round a couple of weeks ago with the supervisorial candidates. The next one addresses the state budget issue during the time of recession. Alex, you go first. The state is facing huge budget deficits. In this budgetary environment, what programs would you cut? What would you save? And if you don't want to cut anything, how will you pay for it?
Yep. So the state legislature this cycle was faced with the exact same question, right? I think the cuts were minimal, which was a good thing, because during a global pandemic, our social safety net is more important than ever. And how I would intend to really bolster our budget is this way. Well, first, let me back up a little bit. 70% of our state budget depends on you and me, income tax. Does that seem fair? When the entire economy basically goes to a standstill and people lose their jobs, they can no longer pay for the services like EDD that we need. So what we need to be doing is really thinking about who isn't paying their fair share. So I will be advocating for things like schools and communities first, which will seek to repeal the Prop 13 loophole on business properties. No one lives on business properties, so they should be paying their fair share. I will also be looking at things like raising the wealth and corporate tax and making sure that we have a fundamental fair system that doesn't rely on working class families. Because right now, and I looked at other state budgets like Texas and New York too, we have a huge over-reliance on income tax, which is acknowledged by every professional working public policy to be incredibly volatile and bad practice, essentially. And it was only bound to happen like this. Another bad recession, global pandemic would disrupt the whole system. And it's good that we saved under Governor Jerry Brown. We had a rainy day fund, but that rainy day fund is about to go dry because fundamentally our budget is broken. And that's why I'll explore measures such as the raising corporate tax and raising the wealth tax to pay
Any
for
programs you're willing to cut, Alex?
I would not want to
part.
cut anything because I am anti-austerity, as we saw in Europe, how poorly it goes.
Okay, and I didn't mean to cut you off. Got a few more seconds
No,
here,
okay.
but I want to make sure you got that in.
No, thank you. Also, is my video doing weird things on my end? It's like doing weird lines.
That's fine.
okay?
You just keep talking. We
Okay.
hear your voice clearly.
All right, perfect. Well, I'm good. Thank you so much.
Okay, Bob, your turn.
First of all, you're correct that the income tax, we are over-reliant. Back in 1950, 11% of our budget or income came from income tax. Now it's at 67%. But even more alarming is the top 1% wage earners in California provide 50% of that. And over 50% of Californians pay zero or very low income tax. So not only are we overly reliant on income tax, we're also even doubly over-reliant on what the heck would those 1% do if they decide they've had enough. And so we definitely need to widen the base in a variety of different ways. We have to also do some severe cutting. It's time for our government to do cuts. One of the biggest thing I noticed in this COVID was how business always was trying to adjust. Every day they would say, Bob, I got this new reg, how I got to do this. I got to spend money to do that, but I got to survive. Yet the government was just the opposite. Hunker down. Don't you dare touch anything. Some of the easiest cuts can be, we have over 1,000 school districts. We have 5 academic institutions. We can certainly do some structural things on the management side and still put more money in the classroom side. We can do, and I talked to you about on our mass transit agencies, we have 24 agencies. That's nuts. We need to cut them down. There, we can pull out from the mothballs. They had a book of all these different agencies that can be cut. We need to look at them over. It's time for our California state budget to go under a diet. It's their turn.
Alex, 1 minute.
It's an easy conservative talking point to say we should go on a diet and cut things without knowing the true impact of those government services on everyday Californians. And it's interesting, Bob, you bring up 1970, because it was in 1970, well, you said in 1970, 11% of our budget was income tax. But in 1978, something called Prop 13 passed, and that is why our budget is completely out of sync. You know, and it would be interesting, I wanted to hear if you were up for repealing Prop 13, because that would spread the pain as you would like. But that is one way, right? But I don't believe in catering to the 1%. It is the people that chose to live here who are reaping the benefits out of the labor of everyday Californians who ought to be paying more. Apple, Intel, all these giant corporations that benefit so much from the atmosphere that California fosters. And we also give them money, just like Tesla. We give them money to start here. They should be paying their fair share. They should be contributing back to their local cities, whether it be Cupertino or Fremont. They should be doing a lot more. They shouldn't be putting the public health risk.
Thank you, Alex. And now, as you anticipated, and for the benefit of the people listening tonight, we did give the topic areas in advance to the candidates so that they would be ready generally to speak to these issues. And so we're going to have a question on education right now. The governor has proposed $5.3 billion to reopen our schools safely, but to disperse those funds equitably. What will you do to ensure that the 25th Assembly District is treated equitably to get the funding needed to open our schools in Fremont and in Santa Clara County? What does a safe reopening look like to you, and how do you ensure adequate funding to ensure equity in distance learning and then a return to our classrooms? A lot packed in, but I think there's going to be a lot of interest in the questions here from the audience, so you may get another bite at this apple. Bob, go ahead.
Wow, that is a huge issue right now. I hope we can talk about multiple times about education, because I think
I'm going to make a discretion.
Can you break that down?
Yeah. Hayes, can you go 3 minutes on each of these questions here? So we're going to add a time at it. We're going to give you 3 minutes on each of this. I gave you a lot, so I'm going to give you both.
So, because you certainly uncovered lots of different issues, from some that the legislature can do, some that would already be done by the time we take office. You know, the safely opens issues, that certainly every school district is going through that now. I've talked to several, I talked today even just to 3 different superintendents trying to figure out what their plans were, how they were doing. Everyone is still trying to figure out the right balance between safety for the teachers as well as equity for the students, because clearly they learn better in the classroom. Also, you know, education as a whole is neat. This is the civil rights issue of our time, and I mean, when I look at the Black Lives Matters movement, you know, this is my top priority, is making sure that everyone has access to a high quality education, regardless of the zip code that they live in. You know, and it's amazing how some people are opposed to that. At the very base, we should be able to provide, and one method we could do is also provide for your option to go to a school, not only to where you live, but close to where you live. Some other school districts are doing that now. Milpitas, for example, allows their employees to, if they live outside the area, to go to the school near them. But we should also allow, if there are people like before the pandemic, we had super commuters, people who were driving 3 hours to get to work. And they would say the reason why they would stick their child in a private school was because that was close to where they work. There should be a way, and there are ways, we can talk more about that, of letting them go to a school near where they work. And as far as equity, well, that's your job to fight for that. There are for that. And I will say too that we can look at the problems in education are fixable. I call it the terrible 4, that there's turf, complexity, profiteering, and fiefdoms are the problems that need to be fixed in education. And we can talk about that more in detail. But the reality is that you have these 5 academic institutions, these 1,000 school districts, and they don't work together. They have so many high-priced administrators, and you take a program like Adult Ed. which could be handled best by the community colleges, yet different school districts want to handle them at the K-12 or at city levels. There are different methods we could do through Common Course numbering, which is a way to help students get through the system faster. So there's so many ways to improve education in California. We'll talk about more because my 3 minutes is up.
Alex, you get 3 minutes now too, okay?
Yep.
It's a big question, and do you need me to repeat it, or do you have it?
You want to repeat it real quick for me?
Sure. Governor has proposed $5.3 billion to reopen our schools safely but equitably. What will you do to ensure that the 25th Assembly District is treated equitably to get the funding needed to open our schools in Fremont and in Santa Clara County? What does a safe reopening look like to you? And how do you ensure adequate funding to ensure equity in distance learning and then a safe return to the classroom?
Absolutely. Well, I share so much frustration with all the families, educators who are out there trying to figure out what are they going to do when the school year starts next month. My brother still goes to high school right now. We're still trying to figure out what's going to happen for the next school year. And this is my fundamental frustration. We've had 4 months to figure out and game this out, how we would reopen, how would we try to have some sense of normalcy. What I will advocate as an assembly member, because I think we will still be in a similar situation, is that we need to have certainty. Having talked to educators, school board members, and families, uncertainty is the worst thing to happen, right? They just don't know what's going to happen. Are you going to send my kid to a COVID-infected classroom? Are they going to have no instruction at all? It's awful. So what we need is that certainty. And I think I'm going to advocate with the governor is that we need a real plan to say, this is the worst case scenario right now. COVID is going to be too dangerous for people to go back and gather in the hundreds or thousands at a time. And this is how we're going to do a hybridized or social distancing learning. And with the billions of dollars that the governor is allocating, I'm hoping to fight for that for my district. Because right now, not every family has the privilege of having high-speed internet access. I guess something going with my internet too, right? So they need to be able to access quality internet to have quality education. We need to have the certainty to plan these out. If instructors aren't told this year is hybrid education or this year is digital education, they can't adapt for it. And they're going to adapt for it like right now, where it's a month before school opening. And that is incredibly frustrating to everyone in this process. So we need to have that clarity. And I would advocate so much with the state superintendent and with the governor to say, you need to have a clear plan of action, what we're going to do, even if you're assuming worst case scenario, right? Because even with worst case scenario, say the pandemic clears up, we can go back to normal. I would rather us say, this is the worst case scenario. You're going to stay at home. This is how we will provide for you. This is how we get internet access. This is how we'll help teachers and students through the process. But right now, the state has taken a very hands-off approach. Every now and then we will give a decree from high up and above. But it is educators individually and school districts that have the onus of figuring out the plan. So it's going to be my duty, especially going next year, however bad the pandemic still is, to get clarity for our school district to say, this is what the guidance says, so you can have more time to plan out, more time to communicate with your with parents and with your students, so you can have clarity to get quality education.
Now, Bob, you have another minute.
Look, we could probably spend a whole hour on education. Again, to repeat a little bit, 54% of the budget of California is allocated to education. When you think about that. So that's the single biggest item. And we are spending enormous amounts of money on education, but we're clearly not getting our money's worth. And this pandemic has definitely demonstrated the huge disparities between the quality of education. And in all deference, 28 of the last 30 years, California has been in charge by the Democrats. And if they wanted to fix this problem, they could have. They are in complete control, and they could have done something if they want. Instead, what they try to do is blame the federal government because they don't want to look behind their own sheets that they are in charge and could fix this if they wanted to, but they don't. It is horribly wrong that they need equities of the school quality based upon your income levels. It's sad. It's horrible. I've talked to Democrats who say they're for equality, except, oh, but not in my neighborhood. That is so pathetic and bad. It is
Thank
time
you, Bob.
There you
go.
go.
To the next topic. I'm sure with the audience questions, we're going to get more education questions. Now the next topic is climate, and Alex, you're going to have 2 minutes. What should the state's climate priorities be for energy production, waste reduction, and resource conservation?
Yes. So I believe in meeting our 100% renewable energy goal by 2045. Unfortunately, that is 25 years from now. And given the track record for 2020, I don't know if there will be a planet around in 25 years, frankly. But we need to do with all diligence to fight for California's version of the Green New Deal. We need a green energy infrastructure grid, green transport infrastructure, sustainable communities and housing, and green jobs for everyone. It is a massive undertaking. That's why it's called the Green New Deal, just like an FDR did back in the day, and that transformed our country, because that is what it will take to fight climate change and mitigate its effects. So how to do that, though? We need to make sure first that we fireproof and own our energy grid. Right now, we might miss owning PG&E. Right now, PG&E is a corporation that has a history of negligence, frankly, and has not done very well for us. But we need to own that grid and then also invest in microgrids so that energy is more localized and resistant to fire. At the same time, the state needs to be funding our research institutions in research and development towards battery power, because we have a lot of sun and wind, but we don't have the capacity to store it for when we need base load. So that's why we currently rely on gas and fossil fuel, and because our energy grid just isn't technologically adapted yet. So we need to invest in those things. And as same thing with pollution, we need to cut down on emissions borne by cars, and as well as emissions borne through plastics and single-use items. And I will be hopefully authoring legislation to hold corporations accountable for all their waste and return us to a deposit system like we had in the 60s. But overall, we need a concerted effort, and it requires the visioning of every single sector to meet the climate crisis as it unfolds. Thank you.
Mr. Brunton.
I'm going to work on this issue from both the environment and pollution levels. I believe we need to get back to recycling again. We used to be able to recycle bottles and glass and get our money back, and this is an area where we just kind of let it drop, and we need to get that back, a system that makes it work again. One idea that people were bounced around is called you sell it, you take it back. I'm not sure how well Safeway would like that, but the idea behind it is, look, you've got these bottles, we're paying the money for the recyclable, and we're not getting it back. I'd like to see expansion of our state parks. You know, they are the jewel, one of the real jewels of our state. And not only is it good for the environment, it's also good for your environment. It helps calm you down. It'll make it makes your life more joyful. And frankly, we need to have more joy in our life. Also, I'd like to see a mandate towards recyclable electronics. This could also be a way to have jobs and careers. I mean, yes, in the old days, they used to have the TV repairman, but the idea behind this towards having such a throwaway society, where we could just truly have electronics that last a long time, would be better there. And also, as you heard me talk a little about on gas tax reforms, we're going to have to move somewhat to a movement towards some sort of a mileage tax, because as we have fewer and fewer cars with gas, we're going to have to find some sort of funding for that, for the infrastructure for that. There you go.
There you go. And we have Mr. Lee somewhere in his room. Are you back, sir?
Sorry, my laptop is dying, which is not.
Is it dying? Uh-oh.
Oh, maybe that's why it's making all this thing. So give me 1 second. See, this is not what we'd have to deal with if we had in-person events.
That's right. Well, what I'd like to do is maybe you take this 1 minute, and then in the next round, you can work on it when Bob answers the next question. So why don't you soldier through if you can on the climate priorities, if you wish.
Yeah. Yep. So with all due respect, the question is about how to transition towards renewable energy, and we're not going to recycle our way through it because, frankly, the United States depended on third world and developing countries to dump all their trash in. And when China, a fully developed country with much better green infrastructure than us today, said, we're not having it anymore, we can't do that anymore. So we need to make sure that we're holding polluters accountable, as well as focusing on the green energy, because without doing that, you know, a couple bottles here and there, well, it's great. It's not going to solve our climate crisis and our carbon pollution problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Our next question deals with our LGBTQ community. And Bob, you're going to be up first. What are the needs for our LGBTQ plus community that our state legislature must address? And how will you work to make the LGBT community feel welcomed and safe?
And this is a personal issue for me, and in many ways, I have a family member, but I just for knowledge sake on that, I think Covered California can play a bigger role in this issue. Certainly can provide the types of medical care and coverage that's needed for this community, and so I would support that. Also, we certainly need to make sure that all the discrimination laws are clearly enforced. It is wrong to pick on people of any type, whether what their sexual orientation is. Over the years, I've had employees, and the whole job here is just, are you happy? Or we do have a productive workplace, and to try to do the best we can to try to teach people the same, and that you're loved and you're needed, and that's what I would try to do at the legislative level.
Thank you, Mr. Breton. Mr. Lee.
Yes, thank you. So, of course, this question is very personal to me. If elected in November, I would be the first openly bisexual legislator in the state of California. Now, that was a surprise to me. I had thought someone else could have claimed that, but I think that goes to show the dearth of representation that the LGBTQ plus community has. You know, a lot of the folks, and I'll share a slightly personal story in a bit. We think we're alone in a lot of struggles. You know, I only learned recently that bi men and women attempt suicide at higher rates than the gay or lesbian counterparts. And that is something very shocking to me. You know, I think that in the modern age we're living in, we're lucky that same-sex marriage, and of course with the Supreme Court ruling that you cannot be fired explicitly for being gay. But we do know the discrimination on the micro level still exists, even in California, whether you're bi, non-binary, queer, asexual, of the many identities within our community. And just recently, there was and I shared this on my Twitter, so you can look at it. I won't mention too much here, but there was a cis white male gay guy who basically was trying to gatekeep. He said, you know, you're not really non-binary, you're not really gay or bi if you do such and such. And that is so damaging to every individual, whether it's coming from a straight individual or a queer individual, that they question who we are. And I think it's within the queer movement to say you should live authentically as you are without having the fear of discrimination. So as a legislator, I'm using my platform to make sure that people do not feel alone in their struggle, to figure out who they are and come out in a society that is very, very much heterosexual. And at the same time, I'm going to be supporting a lot of measures to protect our trans siblings in this fight. Because SB 123, which Senator Wiener unfortunately had to table because of COVID, would have had gendered identity affirming practices in our prisons, which are badly, badly needed. I would champion those issues.
Mr. Breton.
I have no rebuttal.
Okay. We have the last moderated question. I assume Lisa Stambaugh, who's assisting us with the questions, has a number of questions from the audience, so I can't wait to hear those questions. The last question, moderated question, addresses racial accountability. And Alex, you will be going first. How would your seat on the Assembly work towards bringing racial accountability to state services and policies? How would your leadership help drive investment in Black and, I would say, communities of color throughout the state?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's especially incumbent with our long history of racism in this country that we have solidarity amongst people of color. As a young queer person of color, I think it's incumbent upon my position in power to help Black communities and help underprivileged communities as much as possible. I'm excited that in a couple years, perhaps, the Assembly will be voting on reparations towards the Black and Brown community. We passed the bill, well, I shouldn't say we because I didn't vote on it, but the Assembly passed the bill, well, the legislature passed the bill to study reparations for the Black and Brown community. And I'm very excited to see what those results will be and to vote for those things, because I believe that that is the first step in it, right? But we need to invest very deliberately and purposely back into communities that have been damaged by environmental pollution, damaged by redlining and racist denial of housing, denials of job opportunities and education opportunities. And we need to confront that head on. We need to course correct. We need to acknowledge that there has been a history of bias against people that do not fit the white heteronorm status quo. and how we can fix those things. So as a member who is a person of color and queer at the same time, it will be very incumbent upon, unfortunately, upon my labor to correct those mistakes in the past. So I'll be I'll be hopeful to vote for things that will directly address these issues, give people more education, more housing, more transportation, more economic opportunities, because they have been denied those for far, far, far too long.
Bob, 2 minutes if you wish.
I will do my best to treat the best I can everybody the same and with love and dignity and respect. The things that there's no question that there isn't lots of inequities, a lot of systemic problems. And that's the reason why now I've talked to some of the people and I think that what I'm going to be focusing on is one, we talked about education reforms to make sure that regardless of the income of you, whether it's irrelevant on your skin color, it's irrelevant on your religion, it's not, it is to have a high quality education. That is the passageway out of poverty. Secondly, in home ownership, I believe in home ownership. And so we need to find ways to increase home ownership. Some methods that could be done is through the use of non-recourse loans. This would be a way in which other people could help and assist to help purchase a home. They do this in the state of Texas to help some people as well. There are methods of part of our educational system to make sure that we really do talk about the cultures and how much they've added to the state of California. So those are the things I'll be doing as a legislator.
Mr. Lee.
I'll just say quickly that there's a great quote that I saw floating around the internet recently that, it's a privilege to be able to learn about discrimination from reading it. It's true oppression to know about it from experiencing it. And I will just say that representation matters. When you're making decisions about these things, your lived experience matters a lot. And that's how I'll use it to fight for Black and brown communities. Thank you.
Thank you both. We're now going to transition from these questions that we have raised to the audience questions. And so some of these are aggregated together, and we're going to go into a 1-minute round. And I'm going to have Bob go up first with 1 minute. We've had a couple of questions indicating that people don't feel like the existing programs for subsidized affordable housing are doing the trick. How can we make those programs better and more accessible? And are there ways we can make housing more affordable outside subsidies? So if you have a 1 minute, Bob, and then it's going to be Alex 1 minute, and then we'll go on to the next question.
Yeah, so, the housing problem, we talked somewhat about the fact we had this imbalance, that we have a supply and demand problem. We had 700,000 jobs, 200,000 houses. So it's kind of like a musical chairs problem. We had more people wanting to go there. And of course, yes, some of the cities were building the higher cost housing. We talked about that. So, and if you're a homeowner, you want prices higher. So it's to have all these forces trying to keep it up. So that's the reason why I'm recommending a few things that I did. For instance, the non-recourse loans would allow to be a part owner of a home, as opposed to, which would be a way to still keep the prices up, yet still be be able to buy a portion of the home. So it's a way to ease you into the wealth creation that you might want to have with real estate. I've talked about sales tax reform. I disagree that it's a regressive tax. It is a tax that's designed because it does not increase the tax, it moves the tax. It rewards for doing the right thing. So it's not an increase in the tax.
Alex, 1 minute.
I'll just say it's regressive because it moves the money back to the rich people. That's regressive. So a way to have affordable housing without public subsidies is inclusionary zoning. So many cities, well, not many cities, but some cities have an inclusionary zoning requirement. So say you build 100 units, let's take this for San Jose, downtown San Jose, for example. I don't think 100 units might not be feasible in Fremont, but 100 units skyscraper or 200 units, 20% of it should be affordable by law. That is inclusionary zoning. We do not enforce these strong enough because right now there's a lot of incentives not to do that, but we need to have a robust statewide inclusionary zoning so that affordable housing by law, by income strata, can be built on site, affordable to many different income strata. And so it's a truly mixed income residence. So it's not exclusively for the rich or exclusively for the poor. Mixed income is a successful model to do so.
And Alex, now we're going to transition to you as the first person to answer this question. And I think you touched upon it, but I'd like to hear from both candidates. Does Proposition 13 need to be reformed or repealed, and how would you accomplish that?
Yes, yes, Proposition 13 needs to be reformed. That's why I support Proposition 15, which is schools and communities first. Right now, a tax that was sold as keeping your grandmother in her house from the 1940s is benefiting corporations. That is fundamentally unfair. So a giant office park or commercial lot has sometimes the same tax rate as it had decades ago. And that is why a lot of our schools, a lot of our communities are suffering, you know? And fundamentally, I think later down the line, we need to visit Prop 13's innate inequalities, right? Right now, when I was knocking on 30,000 doors, a lot of people were really pissed that they finally achieved the dream of being a homeowner, like Mr. Brunton talked about. They saved and saved and saved. Yet their tax bracket is a fraction of their neighbors. Is that fair? I don't think so, but it's a conversation we're gonna have, and I think more and more new homeowners are gonna change the tide on that.
Bob, Prop 13, what's your views?
Well, Prop 13 has saved a lot of seniors from being forced to get out of their houses. The proposition that's on the ballot now for split roll, I'm not in favor of. I am in favor of expanding, however, Prop 13 in a different way. We do need to encourage the seniors to, in a gentle way, to leave some of these nice, beautiful single-family homes that they may be sitting in because they're afraid to move somewhere else that they cannot afford. I believe that we can actually do some partnering with them to help them share in the increase of the property tax that would be of the new sale, would encourage them to maybe want to sell. Maybe if we also had a short term where they could be exempt from the long-term capital gains, and then they give that a chance for that one-time sale of the house so they could have a young person move into that home. Prop 13 was one of the few taxes that's been kept low, and it kept people in place. And it's ironic that in education, they never were willing to change the way they wanted to do funding to
Bob.
adjust to that rule.
Thank you. There are a lot of questions. I want to make sure everybody hears them.
Sure.
As a Republican, and I'm going to ask the question of Alex too after you, but as a Republican, you would be in an assembly dominated by liberal Democrats. How would you work with the opposing side to find ways to solutions, even if you didn't believe a different path was best?
Is that question to me?
Yeah, it's to you, and I'll tailor it to Alex the opposite way in a minute.
I think that's one of the main reasons why you should elect Bob Brunton for this. It is dangerous for this Bay Area to have zero Republican contact. Look, in the state of California, not only for 28 of the last 30 years, the Democrats have been in complete control of California, but outside this state, we are always in friction point. People know who worked with me at Ohlone know that I learn how to cross the aisles. I'm the only one who's going to have to do a good job to be reelected, because Mr. Lee is going to be in a safe seat. He really will have no accountability to you because he won't even be challenged by his own Democrats. Bob Brunton's going to have to, from day one, going to have to do an outstanding job. I'll have a honeymoon for about a nanosecond. I will have to be working hard to get to work together, and I promise I will. I'm a peacemaker. I work. You'll see from my and there you go.
Thank you. And Alex, I think we acknowledge you're kind of on the progressive left, and you're going to find there's a lot of assembly members that have the D label, but they may be dinos, and you'll have to face the same problem probably. And how will you deal with that issue if you get elected?
Yeah. Well, I think as a progressive, my ideology is always about, the only thing radical about my ideology is inclusion, and that's including different viewpoints. And I think that's often misunderstood about from the conservative viewpoint. I think I can work very well with folks who may be more moderate or even conservative in their viewpoints. I actually recently supported Assemblymember Kevin Kiley, who's a Republican. He said that there should be more transparency within the Assembly's code of business. They were almost going to ban digital hearings and remote access. And I said, you're right, but you're a Republican, but I will still support you anyways. I think we have to look at it from a policy to policy standpoint. And if the Republicans have a fair point every now and then, I'll go with that. Sometimes, a broken clock is right twice a day sometimes. And I think I have the personality to be able to build coalitions. I was an underdog in my race, but I think it's through grassroots organizing and activism that we got here. And so I am very inclusive and I will work with everyone.
And Alex, you're up for the next question.
Okay.
What is your plan to help improve equity in healthcare, especially in light of the pandemic?
Equity in healthcare, equity and healthcare.
I'm sorry, my text is rolling because I'm getting more questions here. So this is live zooming on my end too. Help improve in healthcare, improve equity in healthcare.
Yeah. So within our district, the hardest hit zip codes, within the hardest hit zip codes of Santa Clara by COVID are East San Jose. No surprise, it is more working class, more Latinx, and those are people who do not have hazard pay or sick leave and must work essential services so the rest of us can survive. So we really need to look at a hard look at the inequalities within our system of healthcare. It's really a Byzantine cobbling of things. I support a single payer universal healthcare system that skips the line when it comes to private insurance that can be predatory, because the fact of the matter is, even if someone has health insurance, say even on Medi-Cal, it may be too expensive for them to go see a doctor. They might rather skip that for food or the doctor. So we need to make sure that we have a system that works for everyone, that's not predatory, whether it comes to medical costs or drug costs, and make sure that we're using the state buying power to leverage that.
Bob, what is your plan to help improve equity in healthcare, especially in light of the pandemic?
Well, one of the undervalued assets of California's covered California. Definitely, it can be improved dramatically to cover, and it is kind of that step to that single payer approach. We have to figure out ways to. It has a marriage penalty that needs to go away for the subsidized payment, and also the types of to provide certainly more care providers within the. Because certain organizations don't want to work with covered California. So my emphasis is going to be, one is improving on covered California. Secondly, we are going to have to look up at the senior homes is how we're going to work with healthcare with them. During this pandemic, the elderly were the even most affected. And we have to make sure that we have in place for the caregivers and for the medical profession in that area. So those are two areas that I plan to work on next term.
Thank you, Bob. You have the next question again, Bob. One issue which has affected the arts locally is AB5, and I'm sure it's been statewide, the so-called gig work law. Our small opera theater in Fremont and ballet companies have been hit hard regarding orchestras. How will you work to support legislation and activities that allow the arts to thrive despite these AB5?
Yeah, and I think I surprised a lot of people in the primary about my position on AB5. But first of all, it's a poorly written bill, but the intention, and so it should be redone. But I think his intention was trying to deal with the fact of the differences between independent contractors and employees. And I'm opposed to people being exploited, and I don't like people being exploited. That's wrong. And oftentimes independent contractors are. So the issue on the gig economy was to try, I believe, should be to strengthen the positions and contracts of independent contractors. Now, the method for how to deal with the different orchestras, I know there was a newspaper sides, there are some business structures that might be able to be put in place to help to try to work through that. But I'm in favor of improving the standards and protections for independent contractors, which in return will help improve wages for employees. So there you go.
Alex, AB5, what's your view as it relates to the arts?
Yeah, so AB5, I think, is a landmark bill, not only to protect gig economy workers, but everyday office workers too, especially in the Silicon Valley, people who are exploited and misclassified as independent contractors. So to answer a specific question about the Fremont art scene, I think Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez is very amenable to making common sense fixes to it. I do agree there are parts of AB5 that are far from perfect, that are perhaps a little too prescriptive. So, what I invite you to do is email me. My email is ca.alex.lee@gmail.com. We'll hopefully figure it out and make sure that the arts are not too far harmed by the positive impacts of AB5. Because some parts, yes, are imperfect. But I invite you to talk to me, especially when I'm in office, and we'll hopefully fix that part, because the author is very amenable to common sense fixes.
Thank you, Alex. You did spontaneously a minute, so I appreciate
very
that.
good.
Alex, your next step. What are your thoughts on Tesla, including 1 minute? Yeah. What are your thoughts on Tesla, including building a mega plant in Austin, but not in Fremont, and Tesla threatening to sue the state? What would you do and again, my text is rolling here. What would you do to encourage them so that Fremont maintains a larger share of Tesla's plan for the future? 1 minute, Alex.
I think Tesla can be a very noble company because it wants to produce an electrified future of vehicles, right? But its CEO, Elon Musk, is one of its biggest liabilities, not only to Fremont, but its own company. He throws tantrums, and I do think that Tesla is one of the main reasons why our state broke our shelter-in-place orders, because he had the gall to break our public health orders, go down there and instruct everyone to go work at the plant, and now over 100 people are sick, and he's fine, but they met their quarterly profits. I believe there needs to be a stronger accountability to these companies where, we see with Tesla, we see with Apple and Cupertino, where big companies, global companies, plant themselves inside small cities and they bully the people of it. That should not be the case. And I will remind Elon Musk, who is inside our district, or his factories inside our district, that the state has supported his efforts so much, and that if he chooses to throw a tantrum and leave the state, well, I think that's his loss, because he will lose on the Capitol here.
Mr. Brunton, Tesla, bully or great business that we should keep here in Fremont and not in Austin?
Yeah, so, Tesla is one of the gems of our area. And, sometimes I consider it like a rose. Sometimes the rose has beautiful smell and sometimes has a little thorn. And so you can decide what part of the rose you like. I concern myself with the problem. I don't like specialized tax breaks that don't apply to other companies. But part of the Brunton plan to help the economy and help our homeless and so forth is a Made in California initiative. And so I'll be pushing a lot to have products made in California, and manufacturing is the absolute core. So that's the reason why I would totally support Tesla, because it's being made in California. And if the product is made in California, it would be free of sales tax. But if it's made in some other state, it would not have sales tax attached to it. So it could, in fact, be about a 10% savings for the consumer to buy a product that was made in California. And that might, in fact, give them an incentive to want to build it here.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. That's a 1 minute, but you get the next question, though. What are your thoughts on addressing issues affecting the aging community, including housing, medical, and quote unquote aging in place issues?
Who's this for?
That's for you, Bob. It's your turn.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, certainly the aging, we need lots of changes for the aging community. You look at the healthcare worker costs. A dog walker makes more money than some of the caregivers at a senior home. That is horrible. And we clearly made a big mistake of not isolating and helping the seniors right away, the COVID. And it's a combination. You want to give them hugs because you know that that's what they need. At the same token, we did not give them the necessary protections they need. So we need to also strengthen long-term care in California. There are initiatives there about the covered, which they have a special partnership with long-term care. That needs to be funded better and worked on better. We can work on provisions within some of the newer life insurance policies that have terminal illness riders, chronic illness riders. We can change some of the wordings there that can help the seniors also as a way to have the funds they're going to need as they age. And clearly, we're going to have to hold some responsibility for these owners of these facilities that did a poor job to them.
Thank you, Bob. Alex.
So as our society is approaching what is called the silver tsunami, where more and more folks are reaching retirement age, I don't quite like the phrasing, but it highlights the urgency, which we need to address it. More and more folks are going to need care, and on the road and talking to labor unions, especially for in-home care service workers, we need to step up the funding on that. That is something the collective must care for. We must care for our aging parents, grandparents, siblings, even. We need to care for them, those who cannot care for themselves. And we must make sure that the cost is borne on the collective, because if you switch to private carers, it's going to cost so much more on the family. And sometimes if they can't pay it, then they end up in nursing homes, which are far, far from ideal. And we don't want to isolate perhaps a fifth of our population to just to nursing homes. So we need a robust plan about funding for the future.
I think we're down to about a couple of questions here. I'm going to ask you one that goes back to housing. You talked about affordable housing and exclusionary zoning, but there's another question, what is called the missing middle, which is these are housing that are needed for many of our wage earners that don't qualify for below market rate housing and yet don't have the subsidies or the incentives to be built. So what would you do, Alex, to deal with the so-called missing middle for building housing?
Absolutely. Well, I think missing middle housing is going to be helped when we produce more housing in general, affordable and market rate, right? If we had a robust plan to build affordable housing below market rate at income strata, that will relieve the pressure of lower income folks competing with the middle income folks for the same units. Because it's proven by studies, and there's a good Berkeley study, that building housing, building just market rate housing, will help middle income earners in the long term, but it hurts lower income folks, working class folks in the short term. So we need a combination of building. Yes, we do need to build up market rate homes. We need a strong emphasis on building below market homes. And with that robust building and preservation of affordable housing, we can rebalance the correct the market. Because right now there's a real strong artificial scarcity, and that drives the costs up everywhere.
Bob, the missing middle in building, what's your approach?
Well, we got several conflicting issues in this area. You know, one of the things we haven't talked about is the importance of the census to understand what the status of the housing really is. And in the middle, we're also, with this pandemic, we're seeing a lot more distance, people just not going back into the office. So some of the middle are just saying, to heck with this, and we're going to move to where we can afford. Many realtor friends of mine are telling me there is a definite movement from the middle of just leaving the area. So as I said, they can, if they have a job, they can work remotely, they will do so. And I've talked about the expansion of Prop 13 because we have to figure a way. There, you know, you take the city of Santa Clara, which has thousands of houses that have basically, you have oftentimes this is senior living in there, and yet they don't want to move. And I understand that, but maybe if we give them an incentive, they may, because the families would want to move in there. Because also, when you talk about massive building also talks about infrastructure. The houses there already have the infrastructure in place: the schools, the streets, the sewers. So we have to wait to get them to move.
Thank you, Bob. This is kind of a general interest for both of you as we wrap up and go to our closing statements, which will be 2 minutes. But this is our last 1 minute question. What are you doing to get your message out to the voters, other than the usual ways of the past, to be sure everyone can make informed choices at election time? So Bob, you're up, 1 minute, and then Alex for 1 minute.
I must admit, I've been frustrated. I haven't been as good at it as I should. I'm going to have to up my game. I was looking forward to door knocking. I was looking forward to having all sorts of events, and it's really been frustrating. I feel like I'm not even giving a fair chance to win, because I this is the way in which I want it to work. And I'm a face-to-face type of guy. We are, you know, each of us learns a different way or reacts a different way. Well, the way I react is by meeting people. And so I can't even do that now. I look forward to that day that I do. And I'm glad, and I hope my opponent will want to do many of these, because the citizens deserve to hear from us. You know, maybe in the future too, we ask each other questions so that, you know, we can really dig into it. So it's just so that you, the voter, you have a right to know this is a very important position here. And I hate to have the prejudice saying, hey, well, Bob's Republican, he has no chance of winning. Well, give me a chance. I know I can do a great job. And I think the more you hear, you'll see that there are some key differences there. So that's what I would do.
Alex, 1 minute. How are you campaigning during this pandemic?
Yeah, thank you. Well, during the primary, we knocked on 30,000 doors, so face-to-face is a strong thing. I was supposed to go to another Fremont neighborhood barbecue, only because I knocked on the doors and like, hey, we're gonna have a barbecue next weekend. I'm like, all right, cool, I'm coming. We would have had that, I guess, this time this year, right? So it's been hard. But luckily, because we've knocked on so many doors and formed so many relationships, thankfully with modern technology, we have been able to keep up with people either via email, texting, whatever, email. And I do encourage people, if they ever have questions, to email me or social media, contact me. You can email me at ca.alex.lee@gmail.com. But keeping up that way organically, and that's relational relation building. But I have been doing a lot of great Zoom events too, meeting folks from across our district and even across California sometimes. Doing things like this is really helpful. So thank you for everyone at Fremont for Everyone for hosting this. Thank you.
And this points out the fact that Fremont for Everyone is the first organization to have a debate between the two of you since the March primary. That and more.
And I thank you very much for that, Dave.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so, Alex, you're going to have 2 minutes to give your closing, followed by Bob, and I'll have a very brief wrap up for everyone.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alex.
Okay. So again, I'm running for Assembly District 25 because I grew up in this community. I care deeply about it, and I see, even before the pandemic, the deep structural inequalities that exist, whether it's social justice, public health, or economic structures or in taxes. We need to fix these things with strong urgency. While I am a progressive, I will be joining other Democrats and hopefully pushing the needle on change, because what we need in politics nowadays more than ever is a loud, strong voice. And I'm reminded of a man I talked to in Newark, and he said, "Your job is to go to Sacramento for me and be a respectful pain in the ass." And that is what they promise I intend to keep. And that's to the Democratic establishment, to our Republican colleagues, the federal government, because we need change and we need to just upend the status quo, because it is not working for anyone right now. I invite you all to, again, contact me via my email, ca.alex.lee@gmail.com, or connect with us via social media. On Facebook and Instagram, we are at Vote Alex Lee. I'm very active on those, at Vote Alex Lee, so you can contact me. And on Twitter, I'm at Vote Alex Lee 2020. Another reminder to also is that we do not take any corporate money, no fossil fuel money, no developer money at all. So we have been very much relying on community support, and I'm very glad that every cent that we have earned is from community members who are passionate and care about these issues. So I'm hoping to earn your vote come November for real progressive change, and I do hope that you'll reach out if we haven't already been talking either on social media or email, or just text me. But I hope we can talk more, and I do hope to serve you well in Sacramento after November 2020. And we will defeat Trump as well. Thank you.
Bob, 2 minutes for your closing.
Again, thank you very much for hosting this event, and I surely hope that this will not be the last time that we talk. That you, the public, deserve this, and I hope that we'll do this again. I'm a still believer, though, that California has the potential to be the best place on earth. And we're clearly going through a rough patch now. And it's time that we really try to, the sort of fundamental question we got to ask is, how do we respond to this? And I think what you need more than anything else is candor. Look, there is no rainbow. This race considers basically two words a lot: love and math. The reality is we have to do things with compassion, but compassion also means taking care of all of us, and it has to live within our means. I remember the first time my father took me camping, and he said, "Son, when we leave this campsite, leave it in the same position that it is now or better." And ask yourself, is that the way our government's working now? We have massive debts. We're putting on more debts, and those debts suck up so much money that we can't even do some of the great things that we need to have the state do. My promise to you is this: is I'm going to work every single day to work for every single one of you, but I'm going to also treat you with dignity and respect and candor. I have to find out what the real truthful numbers are, and then try to find creative solutions to them, and then have the courage to stand up to the status quo. There are big changes ahead. Please learn more at votebobbruntonforassembly.com, and you're welcome to reach out to me and text me anytime you want, 510-657-8645. Thank you.
Thank you both, and I want to thank our team here. This could not be possible without our team at Fremont for Everyone, Aaron Eckhouse and Hayes Scher, doing a great job keeping the timer tonight and setting up the screen, and Lisa Stambaugh, who facilitated the questions for me. thank you. We had over 100 people register for this event. So we would hear a round of applause. You can envision
Thank you.
and sense that round of applause for your
Thank you, Dave.
participation tonight.
You did a fire
And,
job again.
I heard from Allison McDonald that there's going to be another debate for you at the Sunny Hills Neighborhood Association, Milpitas, coming up. So we should look for
Well,
that.
perfect. No, I like it.
And so I want to thank you and for everyone to look for more Fremont for Everyone events, including when we're planning on the update on our Housing Navigation Center coming up in Fremont. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you both again, Bob and Alex, for participating. We're getting wonderful feedback from the community. They were really pleased with your participation tonight. So thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good
Thank
night,
you,
all.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. End of the call.